Good evening. My name is Dr. Joan Reed. I'm Dean for Diversity and Community Partnership at Harvard Medical School and President and Chair of the Biomedical Science Careers Program. And I want to thank you for joining us for this 2020 Skills Workshop webinar series for high school students and parents and caregivers. Tonight, we continue with our weekly 8-part series for high school students, focusing on the skills needed for success in their academic career. This session will focus on finances and your education. And the Skills Workshop webinar series was created to address the needs of underrepresented minority and disadvantaged high school students by providing concrete information on the skills needed for success in their academic career. Earlier sessions have been recorded and can be found on both the DICP, Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Partnership of Harvard Medical School, and BSCP, Biomedical Science Careers Program websites. Future session topics include interviewing skills, tips for resume and cover letter, and then internships and summer opportunities. This program is co-sponsored by the Harvard Medical School Office for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Partnership and the Biomedical Science Careers Program. And now a few housekeeping items before we begin. All lines are muted and the chat function is disabled. And you can communicate by the Q&A tab you'll find in your webinar panel. Webinar recordings will be available on both the BSCP and DICP websites, and each participant will receive a supplemental packet of information emailed to the address in which you registered for the session. And you should be receiving this by the end of the day, Friday. There will be poll questions, a few short questions at the end of this webinar, and please take the time to answer them. And now for the introduction of our moderator. Dr. Denise DeJesus Diaz is the Vice President of Scientific Operations at Remedy Plan Therapeutics. She is a BSCP student advisor and former BSCP student and Hope Scholarship recipient. We're so happy to have her here with us this evening to moderate the session. And now I turn this over to Dr. Jesus Diaz.
Thank you so much, Joan. It's my pleasure to be here today. And thank you all for joining us this evening. I will start today by introducing our panelists, and then I will ask each of them to spend a few minutes telling us a little bit more about themselves, their organizations, and to give insights into their areas of expertise in regards to finances as well as financial aid. We will spend the remainder of the time answering questions submitted either ahead of time or questions coming from you in the Q&A here. Please remember to submit short and clear questions, and we will, of course, do our best to answer them. And so we have a great panel for you here today, and it's my pleasure to introduce all of them. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. First, we have Claire Denison. She is the interim co-CEO of Chief Program Officer at UAspire.
Hello. Do you want me to go ahead and explain about UAspire first, or do you want to wait till the end, Denise?
Let's go through them, and then I'll come back to you at the end.
Great.
We also have Jonathan Hughes, who's the Associate Director of College Planning and Education at Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority. We also have with us Dr. Darren Morey. He is the Director of Undergraduate Scholarship Program at the Office of Intramural Training and Education at the National Institutes of Health. And last but not least, we have Mr. Edward Rowell, who is the Vice President of Eastern Bank Wealth Management. Thank you all for being here with us today, answering our questions from the students. To everyone, please remember to submit your questions in the Q&A. To get started, I know there are a lot of questions coming in. I would like for our panelists to introduce themselves and let us know how they can help us understand how to get and afford going to college. First, let's start with Claire Dennison. Claire.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in this evening. Again, my name is Claire Dennison, and I represent an organization called U Aspire. We're a national organization focused on college affordability. And so what that means is we operate in 3 different states, New York, Massachusetts, and California. And we advise students directly, as well as train college counselors and secondary school counselors around the country around issues of financial aid and affordability. And I am happy to be here to represent them today. My area of expertise, or at least our organization's area of expertise, is how to make the financial aid process, specifically from kind of beginning in your junior year of high school through college graduation, and even thinking beyond into kind of loan repayment and debt repayment. I can help you with talking about the different forms and the different processes involved in financial aid, as well as any kind of technical questions you may have around things like the FAFSA or CSS profile that you might be filling out right now. And if I don't have the answer, I'm sure one of my colleagues do, or I can point you in the right direction on our USpire website. So again, kind of more focused on the issue of affordability, but certainly can help with some of the technical process questions as well. Thank you again. And if you do hear my kids in the background, welcome to COVID. I'm sure you've all been there, but thank you for your patience and grace.
Thank you so much, Claire. Next, we have Jonathan.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here. I'm from MIFA, and I'm sorry if we could have shortened the name to MIFA and not had you read out Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority, Denise, but I'm glad you did, because that's who we are, and we are a not-for-profit agency that was created by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts back in 1982. And so we cover some of the same territory as Claire mentioned, as Claire does with U Aspire, regarding promoting college access and affordability. And what we really do is we help Massachusetts families to plan, save, and pay for college, and we do that in a number of ways. We offer 2 savings plans. I know some of you folks have had 529 plans. I can help you out with some 529 questions should you have them. We're a lender, we're a loan lender, so we can talk to you about lending a little bit and talk about best practices. And we do a lot of outreach in terms of financial aid, filing the FAFSA, filing the profile. In a typical year, we would be able to say that we did over 500 in-person seminars throughout the state. Of course, this is not a typical year, so everything that we're doing is virtual. But again, offering the same content, offering the same services. So should you have any questions regarding planning, saving, paying for college, financial aid, loan repayment, saving, anything like that, again, very much like what Claire described, either I can help you out or somebody on the panel can help you out, or we can get you to the people who can help you. So, but I'm very pleased to be here and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Jonathan. And next we have Dara.
Good evening, and thanks for inviting me. I really enjoy participating in this program every year. As Dr. DeJesus Diaz mentioned, my name is Daryl Murray. I am the director of the National Institutes of Health Undergraduate Scholarship Program. This program awards undergraduate students who are at least in their first semester of undergraduate studies and have an interest in biomedical, behavioral, or social science research. We offer them scholarships up to $20,000 a year to cover educational expenses. In exchange for each year of financial support, students are obligated after graduation to come to the NIH and serve a year and work in an NIH lab. After each year of award, they're obligated to come and participate in a 10-week summer internship. This is a very competitive program. We only select about 20 to 25 students a year out of a pool of around 300 applications. Again, students have to be at least in their first semester as an undergraduate. Some of the eligibility criteria include a GPA of 3.3 and above. They have to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident since it's public money. This program is actually a congressionally appropriated program, so we operate under a congressional statute. I hope that I can answer some of your questions specifically about this program, as well as some of your maybe general questions about scholarships. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And next we have Edward Roa.
You got it. I am a relationship manager at Eastern Bank. I suspect many of you have heard of it. We're primarily in Eastern Massachusetts, and my side of the equation is banking services, financial planning with individuals and families, and money management. I have a lot of thoughts on how you should set up a banking relationship when you go off to school, and I can help you do that. I recall that long ago, when I was headed off to college my freshman year, I'd never written a check. I had never had a checking account, and it was all mystery to me. So if I can give you some insight into how to do that, and give you some insight into the do's and don'ts. There's some very important do's and don'ts, because you can get yourself in difficulty if you're not careful. I don't want to make anybody nervous, but there are issues out there. So if anybody is interested in that side of it, I would welcome chatting with you. Thanks for having me tonight too.
Thank you, great. It's great to have all of you here. I will start with some of the questions that we received before today. And I'm gonna start with Claire. One of the questions would be, what are things, for example, 3 key elements that the students and their parents need to have in consideration when they begin their search for financial aid, and how is that gonna influence their decision making?
Yeah, great question. I think the first thing there's a kind of a few parallel processes to think about. First, think about how much finances and your ability to afford college play into where you apply and where you might eventually go. And I don't know every single person on this call, but I'm going to make some assumptions that for most of us, finances have to play a role in that decision. Again, kind of both where you look and end up applying, and then eventually where you end up going. So I think having the conversation up front as a family, if you haven't already started having that, at the end of October, if some of you are seniors or parents of seniors, start having that conversation. Understand where the limitations are for your family, and how much aid you might need to get to afford a college degree. I think another key consideration is to look beyond the sticker price. This is something I know John will agree with me on, and others on this call too. And what the sticker price is that kind of price tag you see on a college's website or materials that you might have gotten in the mail or in an email. It is the overall cost of that college. Definitely something to consider and be aware of, but as you're going into the process for the very first time, know that that is the maximum amount a family would ever pay for a college education. There's a lot of financial aid out there for you and your family, and there's a lot of other resources to help you shrink that overall amount. So that's another key piece. And then the third thing I'll mention now, and then we can kind of go into more detail on any of these things, is to gather your financial materials. So figure out if you have the ability to apply for financial aid in the state that you live in, and apply for federal financial aid or state financial aid. And if so, you're going to likely need, if you qualify and are able to do that, you're going to need to come up with a lot of financial information. What's in your bank account? What are some of your assets if you have assets? Where your tax forms from 2 years prior, because that's what you use for this year's FAFSA federal application for federal application for financial student aid. So all of these things are critical to start gathering, because when you sit down, you're not going to want to keep going back and trying to collect all this information. So those are the 3 things I would mention, is kind of consider how much finances need to play a role, and make sure you look beyond the sticker price as you start to navigate where you might want to apply. I know there are a lot of resources out there. And then finally collect a lot of the financial information that can help make the process a little bit easier when you start for the first time to sit down and actually fill out some of those forms to unlock those dollars to help you.
I'd like to piggyback off that, if that's okay, and just mention, one of the earliest sort of beneficial things that you can do is when you're looking for it. This starts as soon as you start looking at different colleges. You know, you should be, as much as we say that you should have a college list that is varied in terms of whether or not you're, you know, whether it's a reach school or a target school or a probable school. You should also have a list of various costs, right? So maybe some colleges with higher sticker prices and some colleges with lower sticker prices, because as Claire said, the sticker price is not the end of the story. Most families will qualify for some level of financial aid. And if you want to know how much you're likely to receive at a particular college, every college, when you're doing your search and you're looking at different colleges and see if you may want to apply there, every college is required to have what's called a net price calculator on their website. And what that is, it's a calculator that should give you, you put in some information like the number of folks who live in your household, the number of students who will be in college for the year coming up, and then, you know, some basic income information and asset information and things. It should only take a few minutes to do, but it should give you an estimate of your financial aid package at that college for a year and leave you with a balance of what that what you'll have to finance to go there for a year. So some colleges have put a lot of work into their net price calculators to make them as accurate as possible. Some haven't done quite as much, so there's a bit of variation between how accurate they may be. But overall, I think that they're actually a very useful tool. I always tell the story when my wife went back to college a couple of years ago, and we did a net price calculator to figure out if we could afford it. And the estimate that it came up with was very, very close to what we ended up owing at the college. And I found it to be very helpful.
Great, Jonathan. That's actually a good segue to what does financial aid, if a student were to receive financial aid, what gets covered? Is it only tuition? Would it also cover for room and board? Could you please tell us more about that?
Sure, yeah. So in terms, it doesn't just cover tuition necessarily. So the things to think about when you're thinking about financial aid, and it's difficult, and Claire would appreciate, it's difficult to talk about financial aid without getting sucked into like a swamp of details. But what I'll say is when you're thinking about financial aid, there are two things, two sort of pillars of this equation. One is cost of attendance. And cost of attendance is tuition, but it's also books, living expenses, room and board if you're going to be living on campus. It's everything all together that it's going to cost for you to, or for your student to attend a college for that year. So now financial aid can cover everything in the cost of attendance. As long as something is considered part of the cost of attendance, you, depending on your financial need as determined by the financial aid forms, are eligible to, as financial aid can cover all of those things. And that's the second part, which is your expected family contribution. And that's what you get when you put all of your financial information into the FAFSA or the profile. They put it through a formula and they come out with this number called the expected family contribution. So they just subtract that from the cost of attendance, and whatever's left is what you're eligible to receive for financial aid.
Great, thank you. I have a follow-up question now.
So you can get more than tuition covered.
Okay. Daryl, you mentioned the NIH offer a scholarship. Are you aware of other scholarships available for students as they move into college, or grants also that could provide the financial assistance that the students and their parents are looking for?
So if students are high school students, I suggest this is the best time to start looking for scholarships. Most scholarship deadlines start rolling around at the beginning of the year into maybe February, some as late as March. I suggest students just start, I mean, there are apps, there's so many ways out there to search now for scholarships, but I suggest students just start with a simple Google search. And in doing so, they can start to fine tune their searches, which may include what their specific career goal or collegiate objective may be, their specific scholarships for that. you'll be amazed as to how much soft money is out there to attend college. There are scholarships associated often with the state itself, depending on where you live. I currently have a student in college in Maryland now, and I'm happy to say, and I'm very proud to say that she's garnered enough scholarship money to pretty much pay for most of her education, about 85% of her education for the entire 4 years. But students have to have a good GPA. It's important that they have good grades. It's important that they try to have a broad experience while they're in high school as well. Other things that you can add to scholarship applications that show that you are a rounded student will also help in your being competitive for many of these applications. There are very specific applications. There are scholarships out there for the left-handed. I mean, there's so many places you can look for scholarships. And don't dismiss the small scholarships for $500, $1,000, $2,000. They add up quickly. So go there too. Don't dismiss that because you see one that's for 10,000 or 20,000. Oftentimes the amount of the scholarship also relates to the bar you're going to have to get over to be competitive for that award. So keep that in mind. I hope I answered
Thank
the
you.
question.
Yes, my next question is for Edward. Another way that students and parents have used to afford college is through the use of loans or debt. What is your take on this? One of the questions that we have, do you think that college debt is a good debt or a bad debt, for example?
Oh gosh. Philosophically, I think it's a very, very good debt. Practically, you have to be very, very careful that you don't get yourself into a bind. I see people who are still paying off college loans. And in fact, if I recall correctly, President Obama, when he was elected, was still paying off his student loans. So they can go on for a long time. You have to be careful. I'm not the best person to talk about the MEFA loans. That would be Jonathan. But I do think that I see people who refinance homes. I see people who do home equity lines, and those can have and could have some tax advantages. You have to be very careful there. I don't give tax advice, but they could have some tax advantages. And interest rates are very low now. So I think if you can lock up a good interest rate, you should look at carefully at whether the debt makes sense. But again, I used debt to get through college and grad school, and I hated it for 5 years paying it off. So understand what you're getting into. Be practical about what you're doing.
I was going to say, Jonathan should definitely back clean up on this with me,
Yeah.
with the MEFA loan piece, but I want to emphasize that it is college affordability is a national issue for a reason. It's because there are not a lot of colleges that are flat out affordable. So I want to norm that borrowing is very normal to pay for college. I think there's a stigma around borrowing because of the headlines that we get in the media around student debt, and it certainly is a crisis. I'm not taking away from that, but I also just want to norm that borrowing is a normal part for many students to navigate and pay for college. It's the how much, per Edward's point, it's the how much you borrow is what you need to be paying attention to. And we have certainly some guidance at USPire around not borrowing beyond the federal loan limit. I know Jonathan works for an organization that also provides private loans. So I'm not saying that no to private loans, but that's a recommendation that you just look at the amount, because there are certainly some loans that don't cap limit, especially based on family income. And so parents and or students borrow beyond the means and then end up with that payback that Edward was talking about, that President Obama has dealt with, that a lot of us have experienced. So I think it's not that the loans are bad, it is thinking about how much is right for you and your family and how long you want to be paying them back for. But the technical side of the MEFA loan, I'll let Jonathan.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, we don't have to get into the technical side of the MEFA loan per se, but I would just say, first of all, I agree with everything that you've said. And I mean, 5 years, I just finished paying off my student loans 2 months ago after 20 years. So, and I only borrowed federally. So I used to love to sort of, whenever I would visit a high school and I would say, "No, I'm still paying my student loans," and they would look at me and go, "Ooh." But so yes, I mean, I think I would say a few things here. Number one, many, if not most families will have to borrow something to get through 4 years of college. That's not necessarily the problem. The problem, as Claire and Edward both said, is when you borrow too much, you borrow more than you can afford to pay back. One thing that we always, and I think this is sort of something that everybody does, but definitely at MIFA, we say, if you're going to be borrowing anything at all, you should start by taking federal student loans first before any other types of loans. Now, those are, loans are considered financial aid, and they're the only type of loans that are considered financial aid because they have a great flexibility in how they're repaid, and there are a lot of options to help students and graduates pay those back as easily as possible. So we recommend that people take those before you look anywhere else. And if you can get by with just taking those, that's phenomenal. But we always do counsel people to pay what you can out of pocket, maximize your financial aid, maximize your savings if you have it, pay what you can out of pocket. Even if it's not, the remaining amount left, pay what you can, because anything that you're not paying by any of those other means is going to come from loans. So the other thing I wanted to touch on briefly is that Claire alluded to a big important story. That college debt is a big important story, and it is. But the way that we talk about it sometimes gets confusing, so that people think students can just borrow whatever they need to take out in their own name with no co-applicant, as long as they promise to pay it back after college. And it really doesn't work that way. It only works that way with those federal loans, but they have loan limits built into them. So you can only borrow a certain amount as a student. If you have to borrow on top of those loans, which many families end up doing, those loans have to be credit approved or credit and income approved, which means that many students are not going to be approved on their own and would need a co-applicant, which is usually a parent, although not always necessarily a parent. So, parents, because I've talked to many parents who don't realize this until they get to this point, you may be borrowing loans or co-signing loans based on your credit, and will be responsible for those if you have to borrow in excess of the federal loan. So when you're looking at how much loan debt is a good amount to take on, that's going to be something that's not just important to your student, but to you personally, potentially as well.
Thank you, Jonathan. You bring a good point, because besides students, we have parents in the audience today. So my question now goes for Dr. Murray. One of the questions you mentioned, you have one of your daughters is in college, and one of the questions that we got is, how can I teach my child about smart financial decisions while they're in college, and should they be part of the process?
The first question, how can you teach your child smart money management while in college? That's a good question. I'm going to tell you what I did. I actually started with my kids. I have 4 kids, and she's currently in college. Everyone else is done. Actually, my son went to the Navy, so he's making money. But I started when they were in middle school, and I opened I'm trying to think of what they're called. Their accounts just for kids. I opened a checking account for them, and it actually came with a debit card, and I would give them a weekly allowance on that account, and that was their money. But I would also tell them that was their money, not only to just use for ice cream or whatever. I would say sometime if there's a field trip coming up and it costs $3, think about how can you help? How can you have some skin in the game? I mean, they started that in middle school and high school, thinking about when something was coming up, how can I help? Um, it it actually sort of went to the point where I was able to get them to come to me when they want something and say, I want a thing and I have this amount to go towards it. Can you help me get the rest? So it really turned into them realizing that they could actually, although again, I'm spending my own money because I'm providing it, but at that point, it's theirs to use the way they want to. So I think that was actually very helpful. So when it came time for college, in her senior year, starting in actually before the senior year, starting in August, we started looking for scholarship awards. I think in the time of COVID, this is really important for students um, to start very early because one thing that they're going to want to have in place is when they're writing these statements for awards, they're going to want someone to read over them, want someone that is going to be proficient at being able to help them with the scholarship award. So their advisors and teachers at school, they can sometimes help them look over these award statements before they send them out. I'm just lucky that I'm in a position. Well, my kids are put themselves in a position where they're able to take care of most of their college financing, and I hope that you can start early enough, and if you're starting late, you can instill in your children the fact that maybe they can have some skin in the game too. Although, of course, some responsibility as a parent is going to rely on you to get them to finish the job. My mic wasn't working earlier. Is it better now? Can
Yes.
everyone hear me? Okay, thank you.
It seems like it's better if you get it closer when you speak.
Okay.
So, we've been talking about how to get through college, but what about getting to college? Uh, College applications are also an expense. So I wanted to ask Claire, are there ways out there that students can save money in the process of applying to college?
Yes, so there's a few different things that cost dollars. One is some of the applications themselves to the universities. I'm not an admissions expert, but if any of my colleagues want to jump in, feel free. But I will say there are waivers available depending on your family's financial situation that you can apply for through the individual high schools you go to. You can apply and get waivers for some of those fees, those application fees. There are also waivers for the CSS profile form, the College Scholarship Service profile form, which is another common financial aid form. You can get waivers for that as well, depending on your family's financial background. So you don't have to pay to complete that form, which is an application for financial aid at some of the at more highly selective private institutions. The FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, the most common form to unlock federal dollars, federal grants, and federal loans and federal work study, is again free application for federal student aid. If you go on any website that charges you to fill out the FAFSA, you are on the wrong website. FAFSA.gov, FAFSA.gov is an absolutely free site to unlock that FAFSA form and get access to those federal dollars. So there are aspects of the process that cost money, but depending again on your family's financial situation, there are also a lot of ways to reduce those parts that do cost money.
Great, thank you. The next question is for Jonathan. We've had a few questions coming about 529. What can you tell us about those?
Sure. So 529 plans are college investment plans or college savings plans. And basically how they work is you put money in your 529 plan. Most likely it's invested in the market and they grow with no taxes. And when you take them out and use them, as long as you spend them on a qualified educational expense, you don't pay any taxes on the earnings. So qualified educational expense can be tuition, fees, room and board, books, supplies, equipment. It's very, very varied, very broad. And they can be used at any accredited college in the country. In fact, even some international institutions, if they take US federal funding, you can use your 529s there. And it doesn't actually even have to be college. It can be vocational training or anything like that, as long as it's accredited. So those are, and there's been some recent expansions where you can pay up to $10,000 in student loans on your 529. You can pay up to $10,000 a year in K-12 expenses for 529. So there's been a lot of expansion in recent years as to how they can use them. So, and in fact, so every state kind of has their 529 plan, and MIFA is the holder of the Massachusetts 529 plan, which is the U Fund, which is managed by Fidelity. And then in terms of the question that people have a lot is if you, how do they impact financial aid? And they impact financial aid very minimally, along with all the other assets that you have. I mean, they're looking at how much you can afford to pay for college. And remember, I mentioned before that you're putting in all your financial information into the financial aid form, and it's putting it through a formula. That formula is very heavily weighted towards income, and they only take assets at a very small percentage into account. So a lot of people, I mentioned it because a lot of people get worried that if they're if they have money saved in their 529 or anywhere else, that they're not going to get financial aid, and it's really not the case, you know. So that is 520. If you have a 529 plan that you want to use for college, it's just a simple matter of calling up who owns your 520 or who holds the 529 plan and having those funds directed towards college expenses. You can have them paid out directly to the college, or you can have them paid out to you, but you would need to show, should you get audited, what you spent it on and that you spent it on a qualified educational expense. So that's essentially a 529 plan. I don't know if there are any other questions, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you. There is another question. I want to bring it to Heather, which is, let's say a person does not want to take a loan and perhaps cannot take advantage of 529s. What other options are you aware that are available for paying for college?
That's an interesting question. If you don't want to take a loan, what options are available? Well, we discussed, or Jonathan and Claire discussed grants and scholarships and that sort of thing. It really boils down to, do you want to mortgage your house? Do you want to get a home equity line? You know, you're going to have to, I actually know people who have actually paid for college out of pocket, very rare.
What do you think about, one of the questions is, what do you think about using credit cards?
Absolutely not. Credit cards typically have a higher interest rate. I would not do a credit card. Would not do a credit card at all. And you're going to have, you know, minimum monthly payments. You will end up spending a lot more money, dollar for dollar, if you use a credit card as opposed to a loan. I would encourage no one to use a credit card. I would also say, though, that if you're a college student, you should have a credit card, if only to build up a credit history. You may need to fly home. You may need to rent a car for some reason. So that you should have a credit card. But you know, don't view it as found money either. I've heard students say, "Oh, you know, I've got a $5,000 credit card." Well, you got to pay it back, and as a parent, you got to make it really clear to them that they do. So it does make sense to build a credit history and have it available for emergencies.
I'd
Great.
actually like to dovetail on that, in that my current college student has a credit card and she only uses it for her Netflix account.
Daryl, sorry, could you bring your microphone closer?
My current college student has a credit card, and she's only allowed to use it for, you know, like the music streaming, Netflix, something like that, $10, $15 a month. But she's building credit history by charging those $10 a month and paying them off every month without running up a big bill. So that actually is working well.
I completely agree with that. If you use a credit card to facilitate commerce, to do Netflix, to pay for a subscription to a magazine, that's fine. I would not use it for things that'll go away. I wouldn't use it to go out to eat, unless under most circumstances I would pay cash. No one wants to pay for a dead horse. So you get to the end of the month and you see you spent it on you know, lifestyle during the month. That's not a particularly good thing. But the credit history is critical. My younger son never had a credit card no matter what I did. He would not have a credit card. He's very frugal. He got out of school, wanted to buy a car, had no credit history. So guess who had to co-sign so he could get a car? I thought I was out of the woods. I was not. So credit history is important.
Great, thank you so much. Another one of the questions that are coming through our Q&A are related to the state of financial aid during the pandemic. I'll start with Daryl, then we can move to Jonathan and Claire. Have you seen any differences in the scholarships or grants due to the pandemic?
So I haven't seen any real differences in the availability of awards as it relates to the pandemic. I think for students, it's quite a bit more difficult to navigate the landscape now. Of course, they don't know if they're going to be on campus. They don't know if they're going to be charged for room and board, whether they're on campus or not. The awards are still there, but navigating the landscape of how that award will be applied and what they may need, the amount of money they may need, has been really disturbed by the pandemic.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. I mean, I haven't noticed any difference in the financial aid awarded amount from the colleges, but what is more common, we know, is that more families, more parents are appealing their financial aid awards. And, the reason for that is that the financial aid forms, the FAFSA in particular, for this upcoming year is going to look at information from the year 2019. So it's going to look at income information from 2019. Now, a lot of people's 2020 looked a lot different than their 2019. So they would have to, and we recommend that if that is the case, parents and families should reach out to the financial aid office and be ready to document that and say, that is based on 2019, that's no longer the reality. And then the financial aid office can make adjustments to the data based on the current reality. And now it's up to the financial aid office to do that, and they may or may not do that. So they're getting a lot more requests from families to revisit. So yeah, that's just a little background and a little color on what Dr. Mari said. But yeah.
Great, thank you. And you mentioned FAFSA and the financial aid application. And I want to move on to Claire because we do have a few questions related to this. For example, one is there a correct way or incorrect way of filling out an application? What about if your parents or the parents of the students are divorced? Who should fill the application? And then what happens after that? Like, what should the students be expecting?
Mm-hmm. That's a multi-layered question, so I'm going to answer a few of them, and then I'm going to pop some resources in the chat that U Aspire produces, because that can actually, you can take it with you and digest it depending on your family's financial situation. There's certainly a correct way and incorrect way. That's one of the reasons U Aspire exists, is because the financial aid process should not be intimidating, but any financial process, if you're going through it for the first time, can sometimes be, regardless of background, but especially if you're the first in your family to go to college or navigating this for the first time as a family. So I just want to pause there and say, don't be too hard on yourselves. This is a complex process, but it can be made simpler by reaching out and asking for help from places like U Aspire, from MIFA, from banks, from institutions of higher education, from your college counselor. So don't go in it alone. But to go back to your question, yes, there are some incorrect ways we see students and families fill out the FAFSA. And then one of the biggest areas that we see is who is considered a parent on the FAFSA. There's a lot of different familial situations across the many students we serve, probably across the many students on this phone call. And the FAFSA asks for parent information. Parent 1 and parent 2 is how it's referred to throughout the process. And oftentimes students are confused as to, should I put the parent who's going to contribute the most money? Should I put the parent I live with if my parents are divorced? Should I put both parents if they live together, but one claims me on their taxes and one doesn't? There's all different kinds. So I can't possibly elaborate on all the different equations of a family, but I will pop into the chat who is considered my parent on the FAFSA to answer one of your other questions that, and again, kind of hit it where I see some of the biggest mistakes made. Another mistake to kind of, that's a pretty common one that we see, especially in this past year, is filling out kind of current status versus what the FAFSA is actually asking for. And this is to Jonathan's point about the FAFSA asks for prior year taxes. And as he just said, for the 2021, 2022 FAFSA, where if you're a senior, that's the FAFSA you're going to be filling out, it's asking for your 2019 taxes. And folks kind of change numbers to reflect current status, but you really have to follow exactly what the FAFSA is asking. If they're asking for 2 years ago on the taxes, fill out your 2019 information. If they're asking for right now in your bank account, fill out today's money, today's amount in that bank account. So it's really critical that you're looking at kind of what timing is the FAFSA asking for. So those are a few of the common errors that we see. But again, I can post some resources and tools in the chat to help combat.
That would be great. Another question that we have is, do you have to be a US citizen to apply for FAFSA application?
Yeah, for federal student aid, that is one of the requirements, is that you're an eligible citizen or an eligible non-citizen. And I can also, I'll make a note right now, I'll put a link to what eligible non-citizen statuses are, can fill out the FAFSA. I'll put that link in the chat as well. And depending, again, I don't know the entire audience. Some states do have state aid available for students who are undocumented or dreamers, other DACA students. So there are certain institutions, certain states that have state aid, and there are certain institutions that have institutional dollars. So there's a bunch of different kinds of dollars. There's the federal dollars, that's what you fill out the FAFSA to get. There's state dollars, you fill out state aid applications to get that, or sometimes you don't even have to fill out an application, but the state will award you that. And then there are institutional, like the colleges, aid dollars that are offered. And eligibility changes depending on which of those buckets I'm talking about. But there are dollars in many institutions for students who are undocumented, as well as scholarships that are available for students who are undocumented as well. But for the most part, you do have to be a US citizen to qualify for the state and federal aid.
Okay, thank you for that information. We've been talking about loans, credit cards, financial aid. Another area that students have and parents have asked is, what about the military? It is known that they can provide assistance if you enroll. Jonathan, do you have information about this?
It's funny you mentioned that. You might have seen me laugh a little bit. I am not an expert on this, but I have been trying to find somebody who is an expert on this so they can come and talk to us. I know that there are benefits. There is GI, the post 9/11 GI Bill, yellow ribbon programs through the state National Guards. So there are a few programs, but I wonder if there is somebody else on the panel who would be able to speak to it better than I could.
So I'm not an expert. I have a son in the military, and we did look at some of the awards that he could use post-military, post his service. There are ROTC awards. So, for example, high school students who are in ROTC, when they apply for colleges, they can apply to a college that has, say, for example, if you are Army ROTC in high school, you can apply to the ROTC at the university you're going to. Some of these awards are payback awards, similar to the government award that is the UGSP Scholarship Award that I direct, where you have to serve so many years for the time of the award that's applied while you are in college. And while you're in college, you'd have to serve in their ROTC. So I do know that award is available. And if, of course, you do active duty, you then, as you mentioned, have the GI Bill on the backside of that, where you can come out and you have monies available for you to go to college. And that's also useful while you're in the military. So my son, who's in the Navy, is also actively going to community college while he's in the Navy.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
There is another question coming from the Q&A that says, It's coming from Isaac Cornett and says, I've heard that community college is more cost effective than a 4-year college. And I also know that college affordability varies from college to college. Are some 4-year colleges on par with most community college in terms of their affordability or not?
I don't think you're going to find a 4-year college, certainly a private college, but community colleges are the most cost-effective options. They just are, and there are some pathways that you can take in Massachusetts. In particular, there's one that is organized by the state of Massachusetts, and it's called the Mass Transfer Program. And so basically the way it works is you would start at a 2-year community college, earn your associate's degree, which is what you earn after 2 years. And then should you want to transfer into a 4-year public college in Massachusetts, you can do that and move all of the credits that you earned over to the 4-year college. And there are different levels of this. So if you make a certain GPA, I think there's guaranteed admission and a tuition freeze. If you meet another level of GPA and you want to partake in this program, you can actually have a percentage of your tuition rebated to you as you move through the 4-year degree. So it's called the Mass Transfer Program, and it's definitely something that we like to talk about and promote. And in general, community colleges and that pathway is something that we like to promote. We like to talk about that, and because it is such a cost-effective option. So when you're thinking about community colleges, and maybe Claire and Edward would have their own thoughts, but I typically think the cost before aid for community colleges is, you're looking at somewhere around $8,000 a year or so. In Massachusetts, is that around where you would say it would be? Yeah, and I don't think that there are many other colleges, there are really any other colleges that are going to come close to that level of affordability.
Yeah, I would double down on a lot of what Jonathan said, and I will just say that affordability is subjective. So that's why I think, kind of having that conversation early that I mentioned earlier, having that conversation early with your family about what's needed, that will kind of paint your own family's affordability picture of what you need. But yes, like if you look at sticker prices, community colleges absolutely have this sort of sticker price. So if you put aid, if you take that sticker price and subtract, especially like grant aid that you could get, you're left with a much smaller net price than you are at another, likely a 4-year institution. But there are a lot of very generous private institutions that have a lot of institutional aid to give. And I know a lot of students that have gone to highly selective private traditional 4-year schools for less dollars than some of my students who have gone to community college. So again, everybody has a different path, but I think if we're talking in more general terms, yes, the community colleges and that transfer program that Jonathan said are kind of like a more secure, surefire, affordable option.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's 100% correct. Yeah, thank you for adding that.
I'd only like to add, and being a scholarship provider, I'd only like to add that stressing the importance of being a good student really factors high here. If you are a good student, if you have good grades, you can often go to some of these very selective universities and get a lot of help. So this is just not only plug scholarships, which require you to have a minimum GPA. As Jonathan mentioned, there's even a GPA component to what's available to you when you transfer from one of the junior colleges or community colleges to a 4-year university. That can also be pegged by how well you performed at the community college. That being said, I want to also emphasize that many students think that going to community college will not make them as competitive when they enter a 4-year university, and that's mostly not the case. You are going to be as competitive when you enter. In fact, since 9/11, for our award, which is a very competitive award, over the past, since then, almost all of those years since 9/11, more than 40% of our students who we have selected were previous community college students. they applied as community college students and earned the award. So they are very competitive. You just would have to reach further if you are interested in research. You have to find a way to get it.
Great, thank you. Unfortunately, Claire cannot be with us for the whole hour and a half. And so I want to give her some time to give her final advice to all the students and parents. But I will come back to keep asking questions about scholarships and loans that are coming up. So Claire, please, if you could give, before you go, 2 key points to the students as well as to the parents in regards to how can they manage and the financial situation and succeed at it to accomplish their goal.
Sure, thank you. And apologies for kind of the disruption in the flow of the panel. I had some personal commitments to attend it, but I've loved spending this time and answering the questions. So thank you for letting U Aspire be a part of it. I have 3 pieces of advice. So I'll do one for students, one for parents, and one for both of you. For students, I think the best message I can say, in addition to kind of some of the other advice I've offered, is to not make your decision about college until you have your financial aid offer and in hand and can make that a part of your overall decision. I see so many students, and rightfully so, getting excited about their acceptances, and then they get aid offers and it doesn't match exactly what they thought. That's not to be doom and gloom. I'm not trying to say you're not going to get all the aid you deserve and more and get all those scholarships that Daryl was talking about. I'm hoping that for all of you. But I think to be realistic and to be an informed consumer through this process, make that aid offer part of your decision. It's not just the acceptance to the school, it is what they can do to help you afford that school. So that's just one critical piece, and it's often forgotten because it comes later in the process. We spend so much time filling out FAFSA, CSS profile, et cetera, that we forget about the other end. So that's one piece of advice I have for students. For parents, I would say, if you are on this call without your students, include them in the rewatching of it or talk about it with them. This is a family process and it's an annual process. And the best gift that you can give your students is to start normalizing conversations around finances and building your students' financial literacy. So do this process together, because it will only serve your students better as they navigate through college and have to continue applying for financial aid and navigating affordability and building their own financial literacy. And then my kind of advice for both parents and students is do your research in advance. There's so many resources out there, from the net price calculators Jonathan was talking about, to the scholarship searches that Daryl's put in the chat, to banks that are willing to talk to you about what this, that Edward mentioned, talk to you about what this looks like for your family. Take advantage of the help that's there. You're not in this alone. I'm so delighted this program exists to help you with this part of it, but please don't go at it alone. We're all here. I'm going to throw a few more links, U Aspire specific links in the chat. If you're at a high school where U Aspire Advisor exists, we are ready and willing to serve you, and might be already if doing that virtually, if you are in one of those schools. But please reach out to us. We have a student support email that I'll link as well. So thank you for helping me be a part of it and sharing some of this message, and thanks to the panelists as well.
Thank you so much, Claire. It's great to have you. Okay, so I have now a question for Edward in regards to loan payments. One of the questions that we go back is, if I were to take as a student a loan, when do I need to start paying that back, and how can I manage those payments, as that will be my first experience in having what I said, low salary? Well,
I'm assuming that those are a loan that Jonathan would help somebody with. If a parent borrowed on a home equity line, you're always paying on it. You start paying right away. So I'd really prefer Jonathan to answer that question, because he'll understand the terms of the programs that are available.
Sure. Could you just repeat the beginning of the question again, if you don't mind? I apologize.
No. It says, when I do start paying back for college loans.
Yeah. Oh, so that's actually a really good question, and it goes into partly what I said before, which is that a lot of people just think that they know how this works. That a student takes out a loan, and then after they graduate college, that's when they pay it. That may be, but it doesn't always work that way. So let me just say, for those federal direct student loans that I mentioned that you should take if you're going to be borrowing anything, those the repayment on those loans are deferred while the student is in college, and the loans don't go into repayment until 6 months after the student graduates, leaves the program, or falls below half-time status. So if any of those three things happen, what happens is that loan goes into a 6-month grace period. And at the end of that 6-month grace period is when the repayment begins. For those federal loans, one of the good things about them is that if that does happen, let's say if a student takes a leave of absence for whatever reason, the loans go into repayment, and then the next year the student goes back to school, those loans can go back into an in-school deferment. If the student has their undergraduate federal loans and they decide to go to graduate school after undergraduate school, then those federal loans can be deferred through graduate school. That's not always the case with other types of loans. So any other loans that you would borrow, really, aside from those federal loans, are going to have different terms. And so if you're borrowing a private loan, so the MEFA loan is a private loan. Any loan that you might get from a bank is a private loan. It's not from the government, it's private. They're going to have their own terms, and they're going to have their own repayment schedules. So don't assume that it's going to be the same as the student loan, because I tell you, one of my least favorite calls to get at MEFA, and I've gotten a lot of them, have been people who said, I'm going back to graduate school, I need to put my loan into a deferment. Well, you can't do that with the MEFA loans. Some has to be making the payments on those loans, whether you go to graduate school or not, if you've got an undergraduate loan. And it's right out there, but people just sort of assume that they know how it works and they kind of blow right past that. So make sure you know the terms of the loan that you're borrowing. And I'll say one last thing, and that is people like deferred loans because you don't have to start paying them until after the student leaves. But if you can, especially on private loans, if you pick a loan that begins repayment while the student is in college and maybe the parent paying, maybe the student's paying it, maybe they both are, those typically tend to cost less than the deferred loans. And the reason is, if you're not making payments on a loan while you're in school, usually there's interest accruing on that loan while it's in deferment. And then when you go to repay it, all that interest gets added to the principal, and then you're paying off what you borrowed plus all the interest that accrued. So it's better, just generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, paying things off sooner means it's less expensive. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. So you mentioned interest, and so that brings me to one of the questions that we got, and I'm gonna give to Edward, is what are the best places to invest the money that I've made in order to pay for college?
That's a very good question. If you have made money working through high school or over the summer, and you're going to use it for college, you need that to be as safe as possible. You need to put your funds into something that will get you the best return possible. But when you go to write the check for school, you want to make sure the money's there. So absolutely out would be anything in the stock market, because as you probably can tell from the news, the stock market can bounce around. It goes up 3 out of 4 years, but if it's that 4th year and you need to write a check, it could be a disaster. What I would suggest is go into your bank, look at what you have. If you have a reasonable amount saved, maybe buy some certificates of deposit that would be timed to mature as a tuition payment came due. I would also say that you could look at a firm like Vanguard. I'm very fond of Vanguard because they're very consumer oriented. You could put your money in Vanguard. You can call them and they will give you some advice on where it should be. But you can get safe money market funds, short-term bond funds that will pay more interest than candidly you're going to get from me at the bank. But the key thing is to remember, make sure that money is safe. You cannot have it fluctuating and not have it available at the time you need it. So you're really not investing, you're really simply setting it aside at the best and safest interest rate that you can get. After you get out of school and you need investing, you're investing for retirement, then you've got 50 years, different story. But college, safety, safety, safety.
Thank you so much, Edward. The next question is for Daryl. One of the questions that I have here is, how do scholarships work? You've mentioned that GPA is important, and maintaining having certain activities is important, and that they're competitive. But can you please tell the students and their parents more information how they actually work and what the process is?
Sure. So when students apply for scholarships, they can only receive, especially this scholarship, for example, they can only receive an award up to the cost of attendance. So let's say, for example, the undergraduate scholarship program pays up to $20,000 in scholarship funding. If what that student needs to meet their unmet need is more than $20,000, we're not going to cover their entire unmet need for cost of attendance. They're going to have a gap there, and they're going to have to, provide another way to cover that amount. But let's say someone is accepted into the program and receives the award, and their unmet need is $9,000. They won't get $20,000. So they won't get $11,000 pocket money for the year. We'll pay up to the cost of attendance. Now, cost of attendance can be variable. That can be what they needed to meet room and board. That can be what they needed to meet fees.
Daryl, could you please bring the microphone close?
Okay, it can.
Thank you.
So educational expenses can vary, I think is what I was saying. And that to meet cost of attendance, it could be room and board, it could be fees, it could be books. But sometimes there are elements that students can add for specific awards that they may not be for others. For example, they may need a new computer. And if you can get that financial aid office to say that new computer is part of your cost of attendance, we can then provide money for you to buy that new computer. Depending on, COVID presents some very unique situations that may be transportation, right? You may not be able to take the normal route of transportation that you're needing under certain conditions. Like, for example, in cities now, some cities are like, it's maybe not safe to take the subway. So you need some other form of transportation to get back and forth. Maybe you can have that added to your cost of attendance, but that's going to be dependent on the financial aid office and what they will allow. But most awards will only pay up to cost of attendance. And I hope that answered your question as to how they work and how they can be applied.
Yes, and we actually have a few questions here about the maximum. For example, what's the maximum a student loan could be, or what is the maximum financial aid that a person can receive? Jonathan and Daryl, Edward, could you guys tell us more about this? Let's start with Jonathan.
Sure. So for financial aid, it really does depend on your circumstances. And so, but you could, it's conceivable, and sometimes it happens that people get everything covered by financial aid. So it's very rare, but it does happen. It's going to depend. There's two ways that financial aid is awarded. The first one is merit aid. And when you think about merit aid, those are things like academic scholarships and athletic scholarships. It has nothing to do with your finances. Most financial aid, though, is not merit aid, but it's need-based financial aid. And that's what gets determined when you're doing your FAFSA. So things like the federal Pell Grant, federal student loans, state, everything the federal government does is need-based. Most of what the state of Massachusetts does, which is the state that I know about, is need-based. So, when you're thinking about need-based financial aid, it depends on what your expected contribution is and what the cost of attendance is at the school. So if you have, after filing your FAFSA, they decide, the formula says, well, we think you can afford to pay $5,000 for school this year, and your college costs $45,000. That means you're paying your $5,000, and then whatever's left, the $40,000, you can get financial aid to cover. You're not necessarily going to get all that $40,000. I hope you do. Sometimes you do, but not always. And so it really depends on your circumstances, in your financial circumstances, how much financial aid you're going to be eligible to receive. But it can be up to the entire cost, although that's not not common enough.
Yes, thank you. Once I remember when I was in college, I received a scholarship and a financial aid, and I remember having a check, right, like coming to me, and I had to decide how to buy the books, how to get to college. And so I want to take this question to Edward, because it came from one of the students. It's, how do I balance my finances at that point?
How do you, what your finances?
It says, how do I balance my finances when I attend college?
You know, if I would strongly recommend you sit down and do a very careful budget. And 2 points, I would see what I had to spend each month just to get through a month. And then I would build in the lumpy expenses, like in January, you're going to have an expense for books again. I would do a very, very careful budget. I would, let's say you start at the beginning of the month. I would look at how much money I had for the month. I would subtract out of the balance in my checkbook everything that I knew that was coming up, to be very careful. And then whatever the net number is, I would look at that as, that's to go out to Starbucks, that's to go out on the weekends, and be very, very careful. I think when you look at some of those checks, they're large. You're not rich. You've got to it's got to get through the year. You've got to pay your tuition. That's where the bulk of it's going to go anyway, and room and board. But there's a lot of good budgeting websites online. I'll try to come up with them. I'm doing working from home, so I don't have them, but I will get them and forward them to you. But budgeting is critical, absolutely critical.
Wanted to follow up on Jonathan's mention about need-based financial aid, and to say that's really where scholarships can kick in, where need-based financial aid falls off. That's the real point where that's when it becomes really important that students have looked for scholarship awards to supplement what need-based financial aid will only cover. Because he's right, it's only going to cover what the federal formula has decided you can't pay. So your needs are going to be dependent on how much that formula says you can pay. And to follow up on Edward, NerdWallet is a good one. I actually use that one.
Yes. Since I have you here, Daryl, there was a question about scholarships and how to, I believe it's coming from a parent, is given the situation of a student who, because of COVID, many activities were stopped. And so how can students stay active during these times and improve their chances of successfully getting into college?
Yeah, I saw that. I actually responded directly to her in the chat, but I'm sure that's a very general question that that parents and even students are probably asking. And trainees who come to our program, we actually have a requirement that they have to do some community service, right? And we had sort of that same problem of, so since nothing is in person, how do we fulfill that obligation? And thankfully, there's a lot of virtual volunteer opportunities out there, maybe through your city, through your county, through volunteer organizations where you don't have to be in person. And many of the volunteer organizations, for example, at food banks and things like that, where you can go and help provide, maybe even sort food for food banks. Most, if not all of those, have created situations where you can do it safely. You can come, there's social distancing, everyone wears a mask, everyone wears gloves. So there's still things that a student can do to show that they're civically active, with COVID around, that will round out them being a good scholar and make them competitive for college.
Great, thank you.
Um,
Go ahead.
One other thing I'd like to mention to back up on that is, because I just heard this recently in an admissions seminar, and they were saying that, what you do after 3 o'clock is sort of what they're looking for these college essays and things like that, to show you what kind of a person you are in your community. But if it's been affected by the pandemic and you haven't been able to go out and volunteer or do things, are you helping in the house? Are you helping take care of some younger siblings or older relatives or something like that? Those are all things that you can document, especially in the wake of the pandemic. If you have if your home situation is different and it's led to some different things that you're responsible for, those are things that you can.
Great. Since I have you here, Jonathan, one of the questions that we also received was, I want to learn about how to manage my money and to lower the anxiety of drowning in debt. Do you have, what is your advice for everyone?
Sure. So yeah, lowering debt. I mean, I'm not an expert on budgeting or anything like that, but just in terms of lowering your college debt, one of the things that really always interests me to think about, and this is something that I heard a few years ago, which is when it comes to debt, most of the students who end up actually defaulting on their student loans are not the people who have borrowed the most, but the people who don't finish school, that they borrow and they don't finish. It really brought home the point that they later stressed, that one of the best things that you can do is to finish school within 5 years of starting school. So I would say, from the very beginning, take a look at what you're borrowing your first year of college. And as you approach that point, when you get your financial aid awards, when you know what your balances are going to do, and you're comparing them, how do you plan to finance that? So do you have any savings? Can you use any of that? What else can you use before you start to borrow? Know what amount you're looking to borrow, and then see what the monthly payment on that loan is, and then multiply that by 4, right? Because this is only year 1. So assuming you're going to a 4-year school, if you're going to a 2-year school, then you can do 2. And see, is this something that you can afford, right? This 4-year monthly payment. Parents especially too, because remember, you're probably going to be co-signing on these loans. If that's something that you're going to have difficulty financing, you may want to look at either upping your saving, however else you're paying for it, or looking at a less expensive college. And maybe it's a point where you can start at a less expensive college and transfer into a more expensive college, the one that is probably the top choice that the student wants to go to. It's better to think about it that way, to make the tough choice at the beginning and transfer in, so you have your diploma from your sort of dream school, than trying to stretch every dollar through the first year or the first 2 years. I talked to a lot of parents who do that, and I said, well, what are you going to do next year? And they said, well, I'll worry about next year. But next year is going to come, right? So it's better to think about this now. So what I'm trying to say is really to think about what you're going to be paying at the end of all this. Think about a figure that's manageable for you and what you need to do now to get to that point. And so I would say choosing a good pathway in terms of colleges, and then making sure that you move through your degree in a good amount of time, in a short enough amount of time.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was a good advice for students. I want to ask now, Edward, the same question, but in regards to the parents. What can they do to ease that anxiety of them or their kids now drowning in debt?
You know, I really, even though I work for a bank, I really hate to see debt. I would keep a basic principle in mind. If you use debt to leverage something and get yourself something valuable, grow yourself, that's fine. If you use it for lifestyle, like a vacation, that's not good. So I would encourage all parents to look very carefully at what they're trying to achieve. And I think Jonathan's point, don't, in the first 2 years, be really, you don't worry about the third and fourth, say you'll worry about it later. Be very, very careful about, again, building a budget, knowing where you're going to be and how you're going to pay it back. And it may sound odd, but banks do not like to foreclose on loans under any circumstances. They really don't, unless it's fraud. They don't. So banks, for the most part, will help you if you sit down and tell them what you're trying to accomplish. But make sure you're achieving something, something in life is appreciating as opposed to just lifestyle.
Can I add a little bit there, Denise?
Of course.
Please? I just want to add that students and parents should be very realistic. Students and parents should be very realistic about where their children or students want to attend. I mean, everyone has their dream institution. Sometimes you have to adjust your dream to fit your finances. I had this conversation with my daughter when she was graduating 4 years ago. And of course, there were many private schools that she brought up that she wanted to go to. And then when I started to factor in, well, you have to have some skin in the game too. And it's going to cost this, and this is what it's going to cost you. And this is what you will probably have in student loans when you graduate. Slowly, it started to become more realistic. And so let's find a good university that's going to provide you with the education you need, but is also not going to leave you with a mountain of debt on the other side of it. And I think, as you mentioned, Denise, that conversation has to happen early, and decisions not made at the last minute, and you end up with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and the same education you could have had for a lot less.
We have a few minutes left, so I want to ask two questions to everyone. One is, I'll start with you, Daryl, since I have you here. Is it possible to graduate without debt? Is it possible to graduate from college without debt?
Yes. I went to an undergraduate university, very small, HBCU. Of course, it was a long time ago. I did have scholarships. I did have grants. I had no debt. My oldest daughter graduated from nursing school, little to no debt, and my youngest daughter is about to graduate in May with absolutely no debt. So yes, you can do it, but it takes a lot of planning on the front end.
Jonathan, what's your take?
Yes, certainly it is possible to graduate with no debt. But what I would actually say is to kind of bring it back to what Claire said at the beginning, which is it shouldn't necessarily be the aim to graduate with no debt. So, I mean, if you can do it with no debt and you have an education that you're very happy with, great. Certainly that's the best circumstance. But if it's a situation where, I remember talking with a student once, and she had 2 financial aid award letters. And one of them was a college that wasn't really her top choice, but she could go there with no debt. The other one was a very high sticker price private college in Boston that was her dream school. And she would have to borrow a few $1,000s every year, but basically got almost all of it. And she thought, well, I guess maybe I should go to the one that doesn't make me take out any loans. And I thought, maybe, but maybe not. You want to think about this. If you are in a position, if this is going to set you up in a position that you can afford to pay these loans back without much difficulty, and you're graduating from a prestigious university that you've always wanted to go to for very low debt, maybe it's worth thinking about. So it is possible to graduate with no debt. But again, I just want to say, yeah, it shouldn't always be, zero debt shouldn't always be the ultimate goal necessarily, if that makes any sense.
Yes. Edward, do you have something to add as well?
I think it can be done. I think it's very, very difficult. I think of my two sons who were just out of school, and I started saving when they were born. I mean, I'm in the business. I did financial modeling, and how much did I have to put aside each month? Didn't quite make it, but I was able to get them through with no debt. But let me tell you, driving an 11-year-old car is no box of chocolates. So I think to Jonathan's point, you know, it may not be the perfect end in itself to just get out with no debt. It's a real balancing act between your life and your tuition.
Great, thank you so much. So we have 3 minutes left, and so I want to start now with you, Edward. If there is a few key takeaways that you will give to both students and parents today, what would that be?
I would say to the students, work hard. It really does matter. Now, if you're in the sciences, when you get to your first job interview, they're going to say, well, what did you major in? Do we have a fit here? In my world, it's mostly liberal arts. I never asked anybody what, 100 people, I never asked them what their major was. What I asked them is what did they accomplish in college? What did they learn? What did they master? Show me that you had worked hard. And grades are a key component of that. And also to the students, your parents are giving something up. They're really going to be putting you first. Don't let them down. Don't skip classes. Get those good grades. It'll matter. It really, really will matter.
Thank you. Jonathan.
Oh boy. What I would say to students is when you're compiling your list of colleges that you're looking at and colleges that you want to go to spend the most amount of time at the colleges that you consider to be your probable colleges, what they used to call safety schools when I was a kid. And, you know, I heard this piece of advice and it always stuck with me. It's sort of easy to pick a dream school, right? And we hope we go to our dream school and we hope we get a good financial aid package and we're accepted and we're happy to go there and we have a great time. But it doesn't always work out that way. So, and it's easy to come up with those colleges that you would, oh, I'd like to go there, I'd like to go there. But you should really do the most amount of work compiling the colleges that you might go to if you don't get into that school, or that if you can't afford that college, because you want to make sure that it's someplace that you're going to be happy going to and happy attending. You don't want to just leave that to be an afterthought and say, well, I'm not really going to go there, so I'll just put this on the list. Don't ever do that. And then the other piece of advice I would have is that to not take colleges off your list if you think they're too expensive. And what I mean by that is before financial aid. You know, if you're, oh, I can't apply to, you know, because it's you know, a lot of the colleges with high sticker prices might meet your full need. They might have, as Claire said, a generous financial.
I think we lost you there for a minute. Okay, so I think we lost Jonathan.
Oh, okay. Well, can you get me now? Are you looking at me now?
Yes. Yes.
Oh no.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're losing your signal, Jonathan, but thank you so much for all the
Oh,
advice.
right here. Oh, okay.
Daryl.
So I just
Yeah, let's go
go
with
ahead.
that.
It's fine. It's fine. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go to Daryl. Yeah. Oh, do you want me to
So,
talk?
okay.
Okay. I'll talk.
So,
Okay, I'll just talk. I'll just say, take it a little bit as it comes and take advantage of free resources like MIFA, like the Financial Aid Office, and like your Students Guidance Counselor Office. And that's it.
Thank you.
and to dovetail on Jonathan's remarks, resources are really important here. Literally billions of dollars are left on the table in scholarship money every year. Students either don't apply for it, or they basically neglected being there. There are federal monies available for those who qualify for them, and they're based on need. Many of the scholarship awards, especially from private institutions, are not need-based. They're mostly merit-based. So what Edward mentioned about being a good student is very important to make yourself eligible for that money. My advice in closing is don't leave those billions on the table. Get that money. It's there for you to use for your college education. All you have to do is put yourself in the position to get it. And that's my closing advice.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all our panelists today. It was a very informative session. I want to ask our attendees to go to a poll that we will launch in a few seconds here. Please fill out the questions. And as you do so, I want to remind you that this event was recorded and it will be posted on BSCP and the DICP website. In addition, a packet of supplemental documents will be emailed to the address you provided upon registration by this Friday. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to once again thank all our speakers, Claire Dennison, Jonathan Hughes, Daryl Morrell, and Ed Rowell. It was a pleasure to have you, all of you here. Big thanks to all the participants, students, and parents alike, and Dr. John Reed, as well as the BSCP staff for all their efforts in putting this together. Thank you again for joining us. And please let your friends and colleagues know about our session next week on interviewing skills. You can also register for that webinar and all the webinars in the series now on the BSCP website at www.bscp.org. And that's it for today. Have a wonderful night. We'll see you in the next BSCP event.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice
Good night.
evening.
Thank you. You too.